Oh, it's actually starting. Um, hey guys, welcome to this week's podcast episode. And for the business aficionados in the audience, I've got a fantastic guest for you today, Kit Lyle. And he's going to talk to us all about business. And what I really love about him is he's talking about leadership, he's talking about private equity, career transitions. It's really a great way for the audience to get a flavor of what Kit does. And I'm happy to welcome Kit to the show. Welcome, Kit.
Hey, thanks, Chris. Happy to be here.
I love your facilitator of peer advisory groups for C-level business executives. Start off by talking about what you do, how you got started, and how the audience could benefit.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Oh boy, I guess I'll start 25 years ago. I founded a growth strategy or decision support strategy consulting firm and intended to serve operators, that's private equity backed executives in that consulting business. But turns out the real traction was with private equity deal teams. So I never really had that much of an opportunity to work with operators. But when I hired a CEO to run that consulting business, that obviously freed my time up to focus more on areas of interest and passions. And so I reached out to a group of operators that are self-described as private equity backed. And what I discovered was there's a significant need for peer advisory councils within that community. And I can elaborate if you'd like.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And kind of talking about I love how we go through themes. And the first theme is navigating leadership in private equity. And you've got an extensive background. Share your insights on the unique leadership challenges executive face and how do peer advisory groups help in navigating these challenges?
Yeah, that's a great question, Chris. So private equity backed executives, I think the reason, first of all, that I've held them in such high regard and I admire them and I like spending time with them is that they're by and large extraordinarily accomplished individuals. So they've done very well in life, in their careers, in business, in university, in sports, in some cases, and all of a sudden they find themselves working in a private equity environment, and they often experience a degree of what I call private equity culture shock because it's just plain different. And it's different for a lot of reasons. They're working for boards that can be very difficult and challenging. In some cases, they're working with boards that have personalities that can be challenging. They're working under tremendous time pressure to create value. And despite all that, they tend to be rather humble individuals, and they're accomplished and yet humble, and they work under a lot of stress. So they, as I said, experience private equity culture shock that comes in a lot of different forms. So let's just sort of take one at a time. If you were recruited from General Electric or Microsoft or Google or some big successful company to join a private equity portfolio company, your natural expectation is that systems, processes, people, reporting, everything is going to be sort of like it was where you came from. And it's not. A second form of private equity culture shock are those people who were acquired. So they are incumbent members of the management team. They used to report to a private company board or a family board. And all of a sudden they woke up one day, the business has been acquired and they're reporting to a private equity board. And it's different. The reporting, the governance, the communications, the expectations, very different. And then maybe you've sold your company and you're involved. There's culture shock there too. So for all those reasons, people's heads are spinning a little bit, and there's a need for people to step back and say, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! Let me hear from someone else who is in a similar situation, who can relate to what it's like to work with a private equity board and maybe socialize an up at night dilemma." So primary reason that we have the Strategic Growth Council, which is one of our peer groups, is because executives all have a syndrome called lonely at the top syndrome. And to compound matters, private equity backed executives often have that culture shock. And some of them even experience what I would call imposter syndrome. So you're sort of like, I've got these up at night dilemmas, quandaries, questions, concerns, challenges, ideas, maybe, and you don't know who to turn to. Do you turn to the board to ask for advice on every one of those dilemmas that's sitting up here on your shoulders? Probably not. So the purpose of Strategic Growth Council, very simply, is not to articulate these dilemmas to me. I'm just the moderator, but rather to share with a group of peers, hey, here's what I'm facing. Here's what I'm struggling with. Here's the challenge I'm trying to work through. What would you guys do? And as a group, they solve these cases together collaboratively. So members show up from month to month, from meeting to meeting, whether they have a case themselves or not, because that group of peers is a trusted, dedicated, recurring group that, depends on one another.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And kind of, you've described this peer advisory group and, you've established this council and kind of explained the process that you use to support executives and, what makes your approach distinct and effective.
Yeah, so it's focused on not networking. It's also not focused on executive education, although there are reasons and benefits that you might join a peer group that focuses on those things. But the focus is on solving a dilemma, a quandary. Sometimes we use the acronym COPI, COPI. That stands for a challenge or an opportunity, a problem or an idea. So it's positive or negative, it's future or current, but it's what we call a case. And so we members join to solve the case. So how do we solve the case in a unique manner? First of all, we want the group, and it is, to be a safe space. How do you achieve that? Well, if someone presents a case, here, I'm struggling with this, I'm not really sure what to do about reporting, I've tried this, it's not working, months have gone by, I'm struggling with it, it's bothering me, what should I do? Now, if that's my case, and you were to weigh in, Chris, and say, oh, come on, Kit, I've seen this 100 times. That's an easy one. All you need to do is this. That's not a particularly safe space. So to work through that, we've developed a culture of our group in which we might say something along the lines of, hey, Kit, that's interesting. I've seen that sort of thing before. I'm not in your industry. I don't know your people. I don't know your culture, but you might want to start with something along the following lines. So it's just a more palatable way of offering a suggestion. But we start our meetings by defining the case and make sure that we have a context, parameters, borders around that case. And sometimes we have to back up and say, well, wait a second, that's more the symptom than the reality. The reality is the case is related to this, or you sort of described it, but you missed the piece. So we want to make sure we distill it down to, what is the issue? Then members take turns asking questions. Usually one great question leads to another great question, and people try to outdo themselves with how articulate or how wonderful their questions can be. And then the last step is what I described earlier, weighing in with, well, here's been my experience. Here's a suggested idea. Here's something you might want to try. So we take turns offering suggestions. So that's pretty much what happens in our group. We do have some speakers. We do have discussions on what we call value creation topics as well. But the primary reason one would join that group, Strategic Growth Council, is because you would acknowledge that you have these up at night dilemmas from time to time.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And what, as it pertains to healthcare, because a lot of physician practices are being bought up by private equity, and a lot of they're being forced to join these large conglomerates. So I think a lot of the audience listening can really benefit from the advice that you're discussing. What the other thing is, independent sponsors and private equity, what are they? And can you give a simple case study where this approach has directly impacted the success of private equity investments?
Sure. So if we just think about the definition of a private equity fund, a traditional private equity sponsor, very similar to a mutual fund, except they're experts, investment experts who are acquiring or investing in privately held companies instead of public companies. and they have teams of people that will find companies to acquire, teams of people who will do the due diligence or the responsible research around whether that's a good investment or not. They've got teams of people that'll, have relationships with their sources of capital, teams of people that'll do the administration, and so on and so forth, operating improvement, and on and on. Independent sponsors are pretty much exactly the same thing, except that they do not have a dedicated source of capital. So in many cases, independent sponsors are individuals who used to work in private equity or in the private equity ecosystem. And they think, well, yeah, I'd sort of like to do this myself. I could do this. Let's start to do some private equity investments. And they find a company to invest in or several companies to invest in. But in order to make the transaction happen, they have to find sources of capital. The way I describe independent sponsors, and I think the reason that independent sponsors benefit from being in a peer group, is that independent sponsors are essentially jacks of all trades. So they're serving as the business development team. They're serving as the diligence team. They're serving as the board, as the relationship with capital sources, as the operational improvement team, and so on and so forth. So they may have areas of expertise, and they do, but they don't have every single aspect of experience that a traditional private equity sponsor has. So therefore, they're jacks of all trades and masters at maybe half of the critical success factors required to be in private equity. So they struggle, and they acknowledge that they struggle, and they have gaps, they have weaknesses, they have shallow depths of experience. And so what they benefit from by being in a peer group is being introduced to other independent sponsors that have the skills or experience or contacts or best practices maybe that they lack, and vice versa. And a simple example of how that might benefit is somebody might be contemplating doing a deal, they've gotten to the point of writing up an investment thesis on something. They're about to submit a letter of intent to acquire a business. And they might reach out to the peer group and say, hey, here's a one-pager on my points of attraction on doing this deal. Would you guys invest in this or not? And if not, why not? Like, tell me. And that's an example of what happens in that particular peer group, the Independent Sponsors Council.
I love that. We have around 5 minutes left now because your time is very valuable. So talk about resolving strategic growth dilemmas, and what are common strategic dilemmas that PE-backed executives face, and how does your methodical approach help these leaders resolve their concerns more efficiently?
Yeah. So let's start kind of at a higher level, and then we'll dig in. Private equity-backed executives' number one challenge is that they find themselves in career transition mode more frequently than any other type of business executive. It's actually roughly every 36 months through no fault of their own, typically. So if you're in career transition mode, you're looking for work, what you're really seeking is a more effective, more efficient process or strategy for your career transition. So we have a peer group that is dedicated to just that. It's the Career Resource Council is focused on enabling PE-backed executives to find their next role more efficiently and effectively. So that's number one. We've talked about the Independent Sponsors Council. We also have a group called the Trusted Advisors Council. So for professional services firms, law firms, accounting firms, what have you, that might be struggling in some ways to develop or maintain trusted advisor status, particularly with new leads, new private equity businesses that they maybe don't have a relationship with previously. It can be challenging to develop that trusted advisor status. So that group helps one another. More specifically, some examples of the kinds of cases that we solve inside Strategic Growth Council. Some of my favorites. We had a CEO who said, hey, everybody, I joined this particular company. It's in the building products industry, by the way, because I've never seen organizational dynamics that are so powerful the culture, the human capital alignment. They've got it so buttoned up. It's really remarkable. I love this organization because of that. I'm proud to be the CEO of this company now. But he came to the group and he said, how do I not screw this up? We are going to be making 4 to 6 add-on acquisitions in the next 3 years. And if you think about it, each acquisition brings a whole new culture, people, processes, systems, communications. The best case I can think of is we'll just water down our culture. And the worst case is it'll just be a morass of different cultures. So we spent 45 minutes solving that case very happily. I'll give you 2 more quick examples. One was an operating executive, a COO in a private equity backed business who said, hey guys, I was brought in to fix some of the issues, the mistakes that the founder had created. I was told that the founder would be leaving the business soon. Well, by any definition of soon, they misrepresented themselves. It's been 2 years, and I'm still cleaning up messes in a live, real-time sense that the founder had created. I want to build this business. I want to grow this business. I want to make it more profitable. And yet all I'm doing all day, every day is sort of cleaning up messes. What are my options? I can quit. I can address this head on, or I can just put my head down and wait until we have a liquidity event and the business sells. What should I do? And then the third suggestion, or the third case that comes to mind, that's one of my favorites, is that the senior most member of the management team of a private equity backed business came to the group and said, every day, some variation on the following theme happens. Some lower level member of the management team that had been there before private equity comes into my office and says, why are we working so hard? Where's the fire? Where's the urgency? I don't understand what value creation is. What's in it for me? What's our vision of the future? What's our strategy? How does it relate to my job? And he said, these are all relevant, valid concerns and questions. So now I need to deliver the message to the CEO that there's a potential mutiny on his hands. How do I do that without getting shot? Because the messenger usually gets shot. So anyway, sorry to be so long-winded there, Chris, but those are some good examples.
I think the audience really is getting a lot of benefit from your advice and expertise. And for the ones that want to continue learning more about you and reaching out to you if they have these issues and questions, how can they do that?
So Kit at the operators, E as in private, E as in equity. And then on LinkedIn, Christopher, quote, Kit is a nickname, so it's in quotes, Lisle, Lisle. Feel free to connect with me, and I'd welcome the opportunity to do just that, to connect.
Yeah,
thanks.
And I love that. I really enjoyed talking with you, and I love people that are just really strengthening collaboration and relationships. And thanks so much for coming onto the podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity.